you have a bigger responsibility. You have a bigger responsibility to that child, to their family, to the school, to all of society. And I know that sounds very overwhelming, especially for brand new behavior analysts who just want to really, really help and come from a good place. I think that's important. I think you can come from a good place, but saying things like, I treat all children the same, and it doesn't matter what they look like, and I'm going to use science. Behavior analysts lean so heavily on science that they forget the human that's standing in front of them sometimes.
The data that the federal government has and that other private research groups have done that show that Black and brown children are suspended and expelled at significantly higher rates than white peers for the same topography of behavior. They are often given ODR, Office Disciplinary Referrals, ODRs, for more subjective categories like disrespect or defiance, as opposed to being tardy for class or, other more like specific behavioral markers that we could identify.
As behavior analysts, I think what we're asking is for us to really interrogate our role when we enter the public school system. Are we going to be complicit in oppression, or are we going to engage in everyday acts? Because those are just as important as the larger programs. Are we going to engage in a series of behaviors that helps dismantle those systems, or are we going to engage and raises we talk a lot, borrowed from Virginia Love's work, but we talk about thriving. We want to raise thriving conditions and not just surviving or eliminating problems.
Hey everyone, welcome to Cooperant Learning. I'm Kyle Steary, your host, back for another August episode. We're into fall, school starting soon. My kids start next week. Steve, how about you? What's going on?
Jameson starts his, developmental kindergarten the second week of September. So we got time. We've got time.
Okay. Oh, that's a little bit of a break. And we mentioned last week, but baby number 3 in full swing. You're awake, and you look good. I don't normally compliment you, but you look good.
Jar, what's going on here? No, we're doing well. Third time around, you're kind of used to the lack of. I don't know. There's no real being used to the lack of sleep, and I'll give Taylor all the credit, because unless she needs my help with something, she's getting up to feed the baby anyways, and so she just lets me sleep. So I can't complain no matter how tired I get, except for the other night when the smoke detectors were going off all night, because I guess they were too old and needed to be changed. And so I'll complain about my lack of sleep the last 48 hours, but nothing to do with the baby.
That's just cruel and unusual in terms of having a newborn in the house. What's going on?
It wasn't once. It was every 20, 30 minutes.
Good grief, man.
And so I couldn't figure out which one was doing it. They're all interconnected, so the whole house is going off. And we have one rule around here: if things aren't going right, we blame Kyle. So thanks, Kyle. Thank you for that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Well, I can't. I just got back from the lake, so I can't really complain like you can. I had a wonderful trip. I did come back to a hornet's nest on our porch, which was that was an issue, but it's been taken care of. So other than that, those things move in quick. I don't know if you've ever had a hornet's issue. They were not there when we left 5 days ago. So
that'd be a whole other conversation, because
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll take a torch out and try to burn it off instead of buying. Let's not get into it.
Yeah, fair. Well, on that note, I don't know how to segue from that, but quick note before we introduce our guests here, and we have a full house today. Cooperant is a project of Sparks Behavioral Services, LLC. We're an ACE-approved CE provider. If you're listening to this and thinking, hey, how can this conversation get any better? I'm learning all about Kyle's bee problems and Steve's smoke alarm problems. Well, there's a full library on our website that you can get not only some really, really great topics and conversations and behavior analysis, some courses on there as well, but some continuing education as well. So if you are interested, check out cooperantlearning.com. On that note, we have another episode today. Joining us are the authors of Behavior Analysis and Equity in Public Education, an Abolitionist Approach in Behavior and Social Issues, Doctors Malika Pritchett, Sarah Pinkelman, and Shahla Ala'i-Rosales. Thank you three for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
You know, I normally read nice introductions for everybody. Given that there are three of you, I think that'd be a lot of hearing my voice. So nobody wants that. So Malika, maybe I'll start with you. Do you want to take a second to introduce yourself for anyone unfamiliar with you and kind of how you came into behavior analysis and your research interests?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Malika Pritchett. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kansas. The University of Kansas obviously has been around a very, very long time, many, many decades, and is a pillar in the behavior analytic community. So I'm very lucky to be there. Shahla was my mentor is my mentor. But specifically for my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation at the University of North Texas. So we met, Shahla, believe it or not, it's getting close to 20 years ago. And I wandered into behavior analysis on accident. I was interested in deaf education and was going to be a deaf ed teacher, and was working as an interpreter throughout undergrad. So I was fluent in American Sign Language. I thought deaf education was going to be my calling. And I immediately realized after working in public schools for a short amount of time that, and this will be no surprise to anybody on this call or anybody listening probably to this podcast, that children that can't communicate well engage in a lot of challenging behaviors, and I had no idea what to do. And I feel for teachers so much because the lack of training, combined with dealing with really challenging behaviors, put a lot of empathy in my heart for teachers in public schools. And so my running away meant that I ran into the arms of Shahla, and she's been shepherding me ever since. But that's kind of a little bit about how I landed in behavior analysis and what I'm doing now. I have a really, really cool position at the University of Kansas. We have students that are studying master's and doctorate level, students that are on ground in Lawrence, Kansas, and they're working really hard with my colleagues. And then the program also recently just got accredited by ABAI for the online program. So I'm part of one of 4 online faculty. So my residence is not Lawrence, Kansas. I live in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. So I go to campus about once a semester and love what I do. So this paper that we're going to talk about really is a labor of love, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. It was written for children, but the children right after that are for our students, I think, is probably what my co-authors will say. So that's a little bit about me.
Very, very cool. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Sarah Pinkelman, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at Western Michigan University. So similar to what Malika mentioned and how we all met, I can't believe it's been 20 years ago. I had to do the math in my head. So Malika and I were in the same cohort at the University of North Texas where we all met. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher. I come from a family of educators. And so although I did not want to be in education, I ended up there. Throughout my time as a special ed teacher, was fortunate to have some really incredible mentors, Ronnie Dietrich and Linda Hames, and they encouraged me to go back to school and go to UNT. So to UNT I went, ran into the arms of Shahla, and spent some time at UNT. Then upon getting close to graduation with my master's degree, I realized I really wanted to continue in education and pivot back there. So I went and got my PhD at the University of Oregon. I worked with Rob Horner there, which is all about school-wide positive behavior supports, how we can scale up behavior analysis into larger units of analysis. From there, I bounced around to a couple other universities, but I'm here at Western, and this is where I would like to stay. My research interests really revolve around a lot of what we talk about in the paper. Some of my kind of overarching umbrella would be looking at ways we can bridge that research to practice gaps. So really looking at a lot of the behavioral interventions and the research that's been conducted over the past many decades in our field. How do we actually put that into practice so that people who are working with our children can achieve the outcomes that they are trying to achieve. That's me.
Very, very good. Yeah, great. Shala, looking very proud and grateful over there. You're up last.
Start the podcast crying. But I want to say I adore these two. And I adore them because it has been such a privilege and honor to do things with such strong purpose and intent and diligence and effort. Like the effort for both of you for 20 years and some of our other colleagues, the effort that has consistently been put into not only the work we do in behavior analysis, but with our families and with our communities. And it has been an honor. So thank you. I just actually retired from the University of North Texas. I was a full professor. And I had been at UNT for over 30 years in the Department of Behavior Analysis. I'm in the process of applying to become an emeritus professor, which is sort of the next rank once you retire. I don't retire very well, so I took another job, and I am Director of Clinical Innovation and Applied Research for a nonprofit in West Virginia. You'll see by my name, I have a Middle Eastern background on one side of my family, and on the other side, I have a West Virginia background, and it is one of the poorest states in our country. It also is, it was an abolitionist stronghold, and it also, the projects that we're working on are to strengthen access and quality of services for children with disabilities and also for young people in the workforce. So those are the projects I'm working on. We have several research projects going on that continue some of the same lines that I've been working on in social justice, staff training and preparation, and working with direct line therapists on their agency, their ability to be advocates and thinkers and movers with the children that they work with on a daily basis. Their relationships are some of the most pivotal of what's happening in the field. So I have, and I'm probably going to take a little bit longer, and I'll stop just because I'm a bit older.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Like Sarah, many people in my family are educators. That is a high value. So there are lots of teachers, everything from preschool to college, and I have taught most along that continuum in some way or another. Probably the areas I focus most on are very young children. Middle schoolers, we for many years ran an after school program for middle schoolers, and then also with college students, both undergraduate and graduate students. So yeah, anyway, that's a little bit about me.
Well, very, very good. Thank you all three for being here. Each of you have extensive backgrounds in research, your CVs in terms of social justice, DEI, as well as a lot of other topics. But as we turn to the paper, kind of the beginning of the paper kind of sets up kind of the stated problem. That being that discipline in public schools is usually more frequent or harsher for Black students than their white counterparts. It's kind of a well-documented phenomenon. Even the Department of Education has those statistics in some of their paper. Maybe not this Department of Education, but some do. So I guess my first question is kind of what led you to write this paper? Was there a specific moment, a specific case, or a specific question that each of you maybe in your learning history kind of encountered, or has this kind of been a long time coming?
That question is definitely a good one for Sarah, because Sarah and Dylan, who's not with us today in the podcast, really envisioned this paper. So Sarah, I'd love if you tell the story again because I love the story so much about how y'all decided that this was something that you felt passionate about writing about because I think the context in the story, there's a story behind every article that's published. And I think the stories are so important. So, Sarah, please do.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And when I was preparing for today, I had to try to remember some of, because this was a long time ago. Like, I think it was 2019, I think, because it was around the same time that I started reading Dr. Bettina Love, and this was published in 2019. So I think the reading some of Dr. Love's work and coupled with some of the things that my student at the time, Dylan, that they were seeing and reporting and us discussing, and just some of the things that were happening in the world at that time just really kind of set the stage for us to make some linkages between what Dr. Love was writing about, some of our applied experiences that we were seeing, some of the published data sets that are out there, even some of those federal data sets, and bring that to behavior analysis so that behavior analysts who are working in schools, which is becoming more and more common, which can be a good thing, it just seemed like a paper that needed to be written. And it took us a very long time to get the paper in a place that we wanted to get it to. So around, that time, I got in touch with Malika, and we got in touch with Shahla because we needed like more voice. We needed a Black woman's voice coming in and bringing in some of the content that we were talking about. Dylan and I knew we needed more people to help us make this a powerful piece and a piece that could potentially be impactful. Does that sound about right from what you remember, Malika?
Yeah, we actually had and Shahla and I had been talking about this for a very long time. We had a very important discussion about how to frame the paper, but specifically framing it as an abolitionist paper is really, really important. So as people read the paper and as people listen to us talk, you have to understand that we are abolitionists, and we feel very strongly about the fact that you have to change the contingencies and systems to benefit all people. There's also a line of scholarship about anti-racism. So in the very, very beginnings, we were having conversations about, do we talk about this from an anti-racist perspective?
Yeah,
do we talk about
right.
it from an abolitionist perspective? And of course, we heavily leaned on Dr. Love's scholarship and her ability to bring abolitionist praxis to public education. And so that was really the pillar that we stood on. But I do think it's important to talk about why we pivoted away from anti-racism, because that's a really complicated conversation. And now, Shahla, I can't remember if we've done a lot of the overlap together over those two praxi. I don't know if that's the plural praxis.
Yeah.
Praxises?
Sounds right to me.
Praxi?
That's right.
The doing of things, which actually, whatever the word is, the doing of things is the doing of things and the learning of things are probably the two most essential, the two most essential movements of our time, is to learn more about how to actually do things and to learn, and I think, just thinking about that, I would emphasize what Malika said, that the abolitionist framework was really important to us. This is central to how we identify and how we organize the way we are approaching things across all of our activities. And actually, even without that label, that is a central part. We talk about, positive behavioral supports. We talk about constructional approaches. We talk about Big Four. Like, all of that is the same, is fundamentally the same principle in terms of imagining and moving towards things and building and I believe in what we talk about a little bit and in other works that we've done, is that this is an important shift for us as a species, that we are moving towards constructing the realities that are good for all of us, that we want, rather than destroying or stopping the realities that hurt groups of us. But you have to kind of understand those to move towards. And that's why this interplay about anti-racism and abolitionism is a complicated one, because you absolutely have to be anti-racist. There's no question there needs to be movement away from racism. It is one of the most pervasive and detrimental sets of behaviors in our country today, I believe. So yes, that is part of it, but the larger framework of moving towards imagining and constructing a little bit wider and encompassing of some of those things also. And I should say sexism as well. We talk about intersectionality in the article, and there is the intersection with race, with class, with gender, with ability. There are a lot of things happening, and understanding that and then understanding how that affects your responding is an important part of the labor. I don't know if that gets at what you were thinking, Malika, but
yeah, that's it 100%. And I think that Sarah, Shahla, and I have been thinking together for a very long time. And Shahla and I were having a conversation not too long ago. And one of the things about getting a PhD is that it's considered a doctorate of philosophy. You know what I mean? Like we really do think very deeply, and we value this intersectionality, or I shouldn't use intersectionality. We value the interdisciplinary approach to helping behavior analysts think more, imagine more, create more positive circumstances, right? And that part of what we do is why it took us 5 years to write the article. This was really, really difficult, right? We're reading across lots of different disciplines, and then we're watching the news every single night, and are simultaneously, as we're trying to do this labor of helping people imagine what could be better for Black children, watching Black children suffer. That is really horrific. And we don't take it lightly. We'll probably cry multiple times throughout this podcast because of that. But that being said, I feel that I hope that more behavior analysts do more deep scholarship like this, and that our field doesn't drift away from conceptual and theoretical work, because it's important. I don't know. That feels like an understatement.
Yeah. And I, on that note, not to interrupt, but defining abolition in a way that connects to behavior analysis and behavior analytic practice. How do you define that? Because I think everybody, most people at least, would have a vague idea at minimal of what the abolitionist movement was, but they might not necessarily tie it into like today necessarily, or even tie it into behavior analysis. So how do you define that in a way that would connect to behavior analytic practice, specifically in terms of BCB as working in schools?
I'll let Sarah provide this framework, because it's her it's her area of expertise. And we wrote about this throughout different pieces of the manuscript, but schools themselves are systems. And by looking at a school as a system, and they call it a public school system, public schools as systems have encoded rules, these codes of conduct, these disciplinary rules, or dealing with infractions. Here in the state of Texas, corporal punishment is still on the books. You can still spank a child, physically punish them because of misbehavior. So how these rules are encoded in systems made a lot of sense to us, but I think with Sarah's expertise as far as school systems and the disparities within them with regard to disciplinary actions really helped us understand that abolitionism, and Dr. Love's work does this beautifully, abolitionism really intervenes at the system level. So I feel like I'm just like saying the same thing over and over again, but it makes a lot of sense to me. But your question's important. Like, how do we say this to people that are new to this?
Sure. Sarah, any follow up to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just put in another plug for read Dr. Love's work. She has two books out that are incredible. Most, if not the vast majority of what I've learned on the topic is coming from her work. I think that some of the ways that we see some of the systems impacting schools. So as Malika mentioned, schools are systems and they are nested in communities. And so I think that's also important for behavior analysts to acknowledge too. And because they're nested in communities, that adds a lot of different complexity related to funding mechanisms, to the children being served, to the teachers, the administration, and to the larger social political world in which schools are there. So I'm not going to say this as beautifully as Dr. Love puts it, but schools are kind of like a little micro environment of the larger society. And so what's happening in the larger society, we're seeing in schools. So when we're seeing certain things happening within the world that are, when we're identifying oppressive systems within the larger society, we're also seeing some of those systems trickle into schools themselves. So this comes to, you mentioned, Kyle, some of the disproportionate application of disciplinary procedures. So some of the data that the federal government has and that other private research groups have done that show that Black and brown children are suspended and expelled at significantly higher rates than white peers for the same topography of behavior. They are often given ODR, office disciplinary referrals, ODRs, for more subjective categories like disrespect or defiance, as opposed to being tardy for class or other more specific behavioral markers that we could identify. There's also things like children being suspended for violating the dress code, which, for their hairstyle, for wearing their hair in the natural style, for being suspended. And so you see some of the racist ideals that are present in the larger society also funneling into the school systems. And so I think for behavior analysts, we need to know that we're not just working in this isolated bubble of a public school or a charter school, which I don't even know if we want to go into charter schools. That might be a source of another podcast.
Ooh, yeah.
There's problems with that too, and how that's another podcast perhaps. But yeah, I think identifying, so for behavior analysts that are working in schools, recognizing and being able to do some work and identifying I can see how some of these disparities that I'm seeing, in society at a larger systems level are also present here in school, are also present in the community, and where the children that I'm serving, their communities that they're going home to. I don't know if that answers your question or if I went on a different tangent or.
No, it does. It does. Yeah, Shahla, go ahead.
Well, that was beautiful, both of you. I think I'd also like to sort of add or fold into there that as behavior analysts, I think what we're asking is for us to really interrogate our role when we enter the public school system. Are we going to be complicit in oppression, or are we going to engage in everyday acts? Because those are just as important as the larger programs. Are we going to engage in a series of behaviors that helps dismantle those systems? Or are we going to engage and raises we talk a lot, borrowed from Virginia Love's work, but we talk about thriving. We want to raise thriving conditions and not just surviving or eliminating problems. It's not enough to help somebody stop being a problem to other people. If we walk in that way, we're probably going to be complicit with an oppressive system. And the idea of abolition, kind of in a large principle way is to stop carceral systems, prisons, timeouts, out of school suspensions, in school suspensions. I bet you could take most places and look at the disciplinary school, and those disciplinary schools are full of Black and brown children, and that is not, the data all indicate that. So part of what we have to be aware of is the data, and then our decisions to either be complicit with that process or be part of building something better, something different. And we're not going to change everything at once. I think that's one of the things that a lot of the scholars, like I was talking about, looking at other literatures, those scholars, those activists talk about the importance, the womanists, they talk about the importance of everyday acts. Each decision we make, does it move us toward or away from liberation for everyone?
I think that's really evident in the paper, this idea of, sorry, Steve, but intervening on individual behavior doesn't capture the full scope of the system. So you can change the behavior of the individual, but if you're not actively, this is what I took from the paper, at least, is if you're not actively working to also change the system with which that person lives and interacts, then it kind of misses the mark, which I don't know is something that is necessarily on every behavior analyst's mind when they're going into schools. They have a child that they're working with and they're writing a behavior plan for, and they're doing observations on, taking data, the whole 9 yards. And it's a challenging paper. It challenged me to think, like you said, those individual acts of abolitionism, like what are we doing to change the system? To me, it reminded me of that kind of thinking, like, there's a lot more than just like a 3-term contingency here. I don't know. Am I on point in thinking that, or is that?
Yeah, I think it's a very slippery slope to just say I'm a behavior analyst consulting in a public school or working in a public school, and all I do is come in to write behavior plans and to present them at IEP meetings and collect data, and best case scenario, the young student improves and things go well, right? They learn new skills, their challenging behaviors subside. That is so very superficial, right? Like behavior analysts, and we tried to talk about this in many different ways. You have a bigger responsibility. Like you coming in and just writing a behavior plan, and to your point, Kyle, just looking at the A, B, and C and looking at it very linear and not being able to zoom out, not seeing the context, and not seeing the child's risk or their current circumstances being putting them in a position to where they're encountering the disparities that we outlined in the paper. You have a bigger responsibility. You have a bigger responsibility to that child, to their family, to the school, to all of society. And I know that sounds very overwhelming, especially for brand new behavior analysts who just want to really, really help and come from a good place. I think that's important. I think you can come from a good place, but saying things like, I treat all children the same, and it doesn't matter what they look like, and I'm going to use science. Behavior analysts lean so heavily on science that they forget the human that's standing in front of them sometimes. And so those are the things that really got us fired up, because you can still say you're doing scientific work and you're a behavior analyst and still be complicit in harm because you're choosing not to look at the system for being as harmful as it really is. And the carceral systems that Shahla was mentioning, this is what also scholars have talked about for a very long time, this school to prison pipeline, this thought process that, oh, you're just, expelled or suspended multiple times from school. The data also indicate that these students are more likely to leave the public school system and then have a lifetime of dealing with prisons and policing. So the responsibility is huge, and it's the labor is so important, and the collective doing it.
And there's so much that we have that will help us do it. You look at what we understand about difficult behavior, like we understand a lot about the conditions under which that happens. And we can write programs that raise skills in those areas, but also raise skills in the environment. Like when we write programs, we do not have to write them only for a child's reduction. We can write them for the skill increase, but we can also write them for the skill increase of the environment around that child and those people. And the labor will be much less burdensome and difficult if we're all doing it together. Like, talk to the parents, talk to the teacher, talk to the principal, talk to the paraprofessional, enlist everyone in high goals not only for the child that you've been called in for, but high goals for the whole environment, for everyone there. That we have the beginnings of how to do that. And we just have to, I think we have to rejoice in the fact that we don't need to be Lone Rangers. We shouldn't be Lone Rangers. We should be doing it with the community in which we are trying to serve and practice. And that's hard because you learn collaborative skills. You have to learn about third ways. You have to learn about skilled dialogue. But it's also more beautiful because even if we took some problem right now between the five of us thinking about that and the five of us having loving values that are good for the person or people we're serving, we will come up with better things that any one of us could do alone. That consultation is incredibly powerful. And it is also a skill. It's hard.
I think the example you gave there really paints the picture of having to change the behavior at all levels of the culture. You can't just try to change the behavior at one level. As I'm thinking about when we write a behavior plan, we teach the skills, we work with someone, and then they go from, say, an adult foster care setting to the natural environment that they grew up in, and those natural contingencies take right back over. And so we know there's a good chance 5-6 years down the line, what we taught is no longer going to be in use because those natural contingencies have taken over. And seeing that a lot with, I think you mentioned that 2018, 2019, that time period opening up the eyes and really seeing how much bigger of a problem this was systematically than I realized necessarily. This is a much bigger issue than I had any idea of what was going on here. So how do you see using some of those skills like we saw with society at that point where, you had the people that cared and wanted to see some equity, and listening to others and learning because they maybe like me think you always know everything. And then you hear something like, for example, I had a black friend who I went to school with. I grew up in an area that was a small town when I was born, and it was a very affluent, large area by the time I was in high school. And a lot of, I think Metro Detroit, at least in that time, had the most people of Middle Eastern descent outside the Middle East in the entire world. And so I had friends of every background, never thought twice about any of it. And then hearing during that time period now in the future where a friend of mine and his parents having to sit him down like, all right, if you get pulled over, this is how you act so you don't get shot. And I'm thinking, my parents are like, well, screw the police, tell them to go to hell. You know what I mean? And just that difference was so eye-opening to me. But then there's all the other people like, oh, I didn't have any privilege. I wasn't treated any different. And so I've always found it easier to, during conversations, kind of shape their behavior rather than try to teach them. Because if you try to explain something to them and make it obvious, I get more pushback than just trying to kind of guide them through our conversation. And the schools being like a microcosm of the greater community, do you see, are there ways to kind of help shape that behavior where it's not so obvious as a learning program that may now get more pushback from some of those people? Or how do you approach that sort of situation?
I'm going to take a shot first. I have such a mixed response to what you just said because on one hand, not the way you said, because I totally see what you're saying, but part of me thinks we need to keep being transparent, and we need to keep learning and sharing the knowledge. Just as an aside, I was born in Dearborn, so that tells you something about my world.
I was in Rochester, so
for those of you who don't know, I was born in Dearborn, Michigan, which is the largest Middle Eastern community in the United States. And I learned about smiling. Like, don't smile. Don't not smile when you have my features. Does that make sense? So there are all kinds of things that all of us learn, in different ways about how to survive in different contexts. And I think part of me wants to say to find ways to lovingly talk about those hard things rather than trying to do a program on someone or get buy-in. Like I think, and that's the part that I'm kind of
Sure.
struggling with, is because as long as we're in what we talk about in the paper and what Bell Hooks talks about as the dominator culture, even if you're a benevolent dominator, you are doing something to another group. And whether they're the oppressing group or the oppressed group, I think we have to try as much as we can to shift to transparency about behavior change. And actually, we talk about it a little bit in this paper, but we have a couple of other papers. One actually was part of Malika's dissertation, and it is in the first book in ethics, in behavior analysis. It is the first chapter, but talking about this whole idea of behavior change and the ethics of behavior change and the knowledge of other people about what the change is. And that's where I'm kind of like, my wheels are spinning about what you said, because that is complicated. And it's something I think our discipline has to think about a lot. You know, how do we engage behavior change? Who is part of it? And what are we learning about that process? And this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll pass it on. I think what the BACB did in removing the DEI requirement was not good. And I also agree, I would urge everyone to read Baba's statement, the Black Association for Behavior Analysis. I would urge everyone to read their statement, because not even that was enough. You know, in terms of what the labor and the work is that has to be done, that wasn't enough. But to take it away, it pulls us away from the bodies of scholarship and activism that Malika was talking about, that are not in behavior analysis, but are really important to the work of applied behavior change, that I think we have to think about very deeply. I'll pass it on to someone else, but you gave me another thing to like circle in my head a lot.
Well, I also think your point made me think about like the example of a Black parent talking to their child about driving for the first time versus a white parent. I think that's a very good story to tell. I think that's a story that can orient people to a common point in their lives. 16-year-old driving, like, this is very, very common, but the experience of how Black parents are teaching their children is very, very different. And the lessons that Black families are teaching at their dinner tables don't look like the lessons that white families are having to teach their children at their dinner tables. And these lessons are to keep them alive.
Mm.
And I think that many folks that are interested in dismantling white supremacy and interested in it at a scholarship level, at a local level, whoever's interested, many of them, and Sarah and I have had this conversation several times, many of them have had conversations about the fact that it is not up to Black and brown people to teach white people how to not do this thing called racism and white supremacy. That is not our labor. And if behavior analysts that are white, that are serving Black communities, don't realize that they have a lot of work to do, and they don't put in that work without going to a Black behavior analyst and being like, "You're Black, tell me about your experience." That's not how it works. And so maybe, Sarah, you can talk about that, because that is something that when Sarah engages with Shahla and I, she engages in a way that is psychologically safe for us as brown and Black people. But that's because Sarah has done a shit ton of work. Sorry for cursing on your podcast.
No.
And she knows her work will never end. And I want to lift that up, because it's not easy. And white folks have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, Sarah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually had some notes, as kind of to take that a little bit. Kyle, one of the questions that you had given us in preparation for this podcast a couple months ago, we were trying to schedule is the everyday acts of abolitionism. So
Yes.
small, realistic actions, things that we can do on a day-to-day basis. And I first started answering that question by like little things that you can do. So when someone makes a racist comment, especially if you are a white person, you say something. But then I started to even like go back a little bit further, and going back to like what Dr. Love has taught me is that you really need, as a white person, to really reflect on your experiences and your privileges and what resources have been afforded to you that have allowed you to be where you are today. So I am successful for a lot of reasons. My family, my community. I'm a white, cisgender, straight woman. There's a lot of, privilege that I have that I need to acknowledge and know that I didn't just pick myself up. What's the phrase? By the bootstraps or whatever that stupid phrase is. Yeah. That the reason that I am where I am is because of a lot of the privileges that I was granted just by how I was born. And so without doing a lot of that personal work first, it's going to be hard to do engage in some of the other behaviors in a meaningful and genuine and impactful way. It's not going to come off genuine. You're not going to be able to generalize it to other contexts and to other situations. It needs to become really who you are and how you see the world and how you interact with people, how you vote, where you live, everything. It just becomes an embodiment of, it's not very behavior analytic to say, but it's an embodiment of what you do and how you behave and et cetera. Sorry, I'm a little emotional, so I'm going to pass for a minute.
No.
Also, the thought process is that, and I want to be very clear, it's very difficult for people to even, not this group of people, to even tolerate hearing white people, Black people. That in and of itself can make people very uncomfortable. Just talking about race can make people very uncomfortable. And if that is where you are, then that's a good indicator that more work needs to be done, right? But one of the things that I will say, I saw a documentary. My husband and I watched a documentary about 3 or 4 months ago, and it's called Deconstructing Karen. And the purpose of Deconstructing Karen was to have a Black woman and an Indian woman sit at the head of this table. They invited all these white women to come sit at the table and to have a lunch and to engage in conversation. But it was a really interesting premise because one of the rules that they gave them is that if you start to hear something, if a Black or brown person starts to tell you about their experience and about their experience with racism, and you as a white woman become emotional or you try to overtalk the conversation, you have to get up and leave the table and go to another room. Now, I don't think that that's an exercise I would do in my life, but it was interesting to watch the documentary because it provided a window into discomfort through discourse. And I think that is something that Sarah, Shahla, and I settle into quickly. We settle into discomfort and we get into a mode of what can we imagine and redesign. The last thing that I'll say, and I'll let Shahla jump in after this because I can't remember where this came from, but Shahla is constantly telling me as I'm writing, be sure that you're not telling people, okay, well, this group of people is oppressed in our world. This group of people is not oppressed or isn't oppressed in different ways, I guess. No, is not oppressed. But what we're not wanting to do is flip the power dynamics. We're not saying now, okay, Black people are on top and now white people, they have to deal with all of the horrificness. That's not what an abolitionist does. So, and I think, Shahla, when you make me drive that point home, it's because, well, I don't know why. Why? Tell me why.
Because I think God will love it, like all of us. And maybe because I'm mixed, like part of my sense, I'm always never on one side or the other. Like I'm never in one place or the other. Like there's this word Napampa in feminist in feminist work. I think Ansel Dua talks about it, and it's this in-between space. And I think being in that in-between space, and also seeing like we're part of one human family, and that all of us are beloved and important. And the idea is not to have one group that's the oppressor switch places so another group is oppressing. Like, we don't want that. And we want to move away from that dominator culture. So, but we really don't know how to do that. Like that is a work we have to work towards, and I don't think it's easy because, especially for a lot of us that come into the field, we are defenders of people who have been victims, oppressed, and so your first reaction is, don't hurt that vulnerable person, stop you and punish you for doing that. But it's like, and this is part of the abolitionist teaching is, no, it's not about punishing whoever's doing it. It's about also teaching and creating systems that move away from punishment or coercive control, so it's a constant thinking about how are we explaining it. And inevitably, when you try to move away from it, you discover a new way. Like, we have another article that, Malika's social justice is the spirit of applied behavior analysis. And, I think a lot of times people don't read the end of the article, but I think the end of that article is exquisite because it talks about like how to move into those third spaces where one or the other isn't right or wrong, but that you're trying to move to something that's good for everyone. And, I want to kind of make a circle to the beginning of our conversation. Like, we were talking about the fire alarm and the hornet's nest, and all I could think about is, if you haven't read it, I would encourage everybody to read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. And I won't cry with this. It's a beautiful book, and her last chapter is so incredibly moving. And she compares like this America to an old house, one that's in trouble. Like, it has some serious structural and foundational problems. And right now I'm living in an old house and I'm in the process of renovating. I don't have the resources to do everything, so I'm triaging. I have priorities. I'm doing little by little. I'm having my friends help me in different ways. And I'm constantly, even if it's like a little plant or a flower, I'm constantly making sure in the midst of the reconstruction and the reconciliation and the renovation that there's still beauty and joy, and that I'm looking towards more of that and better foundations and better structures. And I think that's what she talks about in the book is that we can look at this place where we are, whether it's the United States or whether it's the whole world, that this is our home and it needs a lot of work. And it's our home, all of us together.
I could keep talking for a really long time about this. We are nearing an hour. I guess I'm trying to think of a good way, a good question to kind of lead us into a wrap up. What do you hope listeners of this episode, behavior analysts listening now, we talked about kind of those small acts. What do you hope that they carry with them after this conversation?
Well, in addition to the small acts, one thing that I think is important, and Malika already touched on this, is that it's not going to be comfortable. And you should not always seek out safe spaces as a white person. You should not always seek out safe spaces to interact. You should seek out brave spaces. And I forget who coined that term. If anybody remembers that term, I'll send it to you, Kyle, so you can post the paper because I feel really badly that I'm not remembering that term. But it's essentially flipping to say you should not expect a safe place because your safety as a white person is not the priority right now. The priority is addressing the oppressive systems that you are trying to dismantle. And that is the focus. And you are going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to mess up. I almost dropped the F-bomb there, but I tweaked it really last bit.
Hey,
You're going to mess up. And you're going to learn from that, and you're going to do better in the future, hopefully. So just remember, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be fun, and it's not going to be comfortable. And yeah.
I really feel very strongly in engaging with the Black community. We're talking about Black children in particular because of this article, but Black and Brown communities is what we're constantly going to be talking about when we have these conversations. And sorry, I'm going to get really sad. If you look at the instance with Mr. Nolan Wells's story is one that is the story every Black parent is terrified about. And if you listen to his mom talk, and if you just listen to Black people, we could tell you all of this information, but it feels so suffocating, to take Dr. Ruha Benjamin's words. It feels so suffocating to constantly be around people that see these injustices happening to the Black community in particular and just move on about their day. And I feel very strongly, like, I don't mean like go find a Black friend. That's don't ever let anybody say that. Go find a Black friend or go find this, but figuring out a way to engage with the Black community and listen to them seems so simple, but it's gonna it really will change your lives in many, many ways, especially because Black people aren't a monolith. But Shahla, I'm sorry I cut you off. I bet you were going to say something that was profound.
No, I think what you said was profound. I think, I guess the thing about, to return to what Sarah said about brave, I think all of us are asked or challenged to be brave in different ways right now. And part of that is trying something and it being the wrong thing, or trying something and it being sort of the right thing, but also had a bad side effect. Like, I think in that way, that's a certain kind of bravery. But this is where I think another way about being a behavior analyst is incredibly helpful is we always could examine, like, what are our reinforcers? Like, what is the intention about why we're trying to do something? Is it performance? Is it empathy? Is it concern for the well-being of everyone, and align our values so that when we are trying things, our motivations, are good. And there are places to get training. Like for example, ABA Tech did a beautiful series. It hit right before the removal of the DEI requirements, so there are a lot of things. There've been, and I want to give a shout out to BSI, which is a journal where this was published. They consistently are writing things. There's scholarship people thinking about things, and there's a whole slew. Like, even if you went through and read everything in our reference section, there's a lot in there that helps, Color's work on abolitionism, Bettina Love's work, Ruha Benjamin's work. All of that are good starting places for kind of like do actions. But I think we always move away from a specific do this, because what's most important is that you're responsive to your local conditions and you act in those local conditions in a way that is important and good and uplifting for those conditions.
I think generally, I just want to thank you all, because I really, these are the things that we see on the news, and as behavior analysts, even in some behavior analytics circles, you see the anger, you see the anguish, but there's not as much of analysis and, all right, now how are we going to behavior analytically, address this? And so I really appreciate that you are doing that, because I'm probably so far down the rabbit hole now that makes more sense to me than just looking at it, on the news. Too much of that doesn't make sense, but this does. And so I really appreciate that.
And we have an awesome foundation. Thank you. Like, the first book I read in the field was when I was in high school. It was Walden 2. And I'm like, whoa, this is amazing, and that was about an ecological approach. It was about environment. I mean, yeah, there's a million things I want to change, but the idea of experimentation to increase well-being for everyone is an amazing idea. And it is super foundational to our field. Yeah, it's exciting, like what this science of how we behave can contribute, but it is a contribution. It's not the whole thing. And I think that's where we get into a little bit of trouble. There's a lot of other disciplines doing important things that will also help us move forward. There's this idea of consultative epistemologies, that they have all these different ways of knowing and looking at the world that are in dialogue with each other to help us all move forward. And that is exciting, that a discipline we've all been trained in can be part of that meta dialogue about how to improve. And it's not just our species, how to improve life on Earth, for all of it.
I think that's a really wonderful statement to kind of wrap up on. I'm sure there's lots of conversations we could continue to have on this, but Malika, Sarah, and Shahla, thank you so much for joining us today. The paper, if you're not motivated to read it yet, I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to go read it again. It's the Behavior Analysis and Equity in Public Education and an Abolitionist Approach. It's in Behavior and Social Issues. And yeah, to all three of you, thank you so much for joining Cooperant Learning. Appreciate it.